Welcome back once again to the Corner of Truth and Courage. You're listening to Fortress of Faith. This is Tom Wallace. In yesterday's broadcast, I opened up a can of worms discussing the issues of homosexuality. If you missed yesterday's broadcast, you can catch that online at our website, fortressoffaith.com. So yesterday we were talking about an interview that Don Lemon, who was the anchor over at CNN for a long time, he was interviewing Candace Owen, a black lady, an activist, a Christian, and he set her up at the very end and asked her a gotcha question. What do you think about same-sex marriage? What do you think a Christian is going to say? If they're a true follower of God, they should follow with God and follow with his answer. It's a sin, and she did. And here at Fortress of Faith, we invite you to join us every day at the corner of truth and courage. We need people who will speak the truth, but speak it with love and not cower. Sadly, there are a lot of pastors in the pulpit who have a backbone of a banana peel, and they don't have the courage to speak out. They'll give the old two-step or some kind of apology for what God thinks and say, I don't know if I fully agree with God here. She just went out there and said, hey, it's a sin. If you're married in a homosexual marriage, you're living in sin. She didn't say it in a mean, nasty way, but oh boy, she was blasted on the internet for being a hate monger, a homophobe, and a bigot, you name it. And so now, the best way to answer a question like that is not give your opinion, just say, my opinion doesn't matter. But God's opinion does, and he says it's sin. And I have to agree with him. I wouldn't be a faithful Christian if I didn't. We're going to continue in the topic of homosexuality, and I want to share something with you that I didn't realize till about maybe 10, 12 years ago. Met a friend, or man who became a friend, a pastor. His name is David Nixon. I know him by his middle name, Johnny. And Johnny stumbled onto something in Matthew chapter 19 about homosexuality, or rather, this passage in Matthew chapter 19 has released a number of people who claim to be homosexuals and found out I'm not a homosexual after all. And he wrote a book entitled Born That Way After All. Now, I know that title sounds provocative for us Christians because isn't that what homosexuals are trying to say? Hey, I can't help myself. I'm just attracted to men. And it's just my nature. I was born that way. Well, actually, the truth is that there is something about how they were born, but it doesn't mean that they're homosexual. And I wished every Christian knew this and understood this, because there's a lot of people that are living with a lot of confusion and guilt and pain, even Christians. And I've got friends who are Christians. They've raised their children under the Word of God. And we would have thought that these kids are Christians, born again. And yet they grow up and then announce, I'm gay, I'm a homosexual, I'm a lesbian. There's a lot of parents out there that are struggling because they've gone through that. I hope what we're going to cover today will be a help to you. And the answer is found in the Bible. Not Johnny Nixon, not his book, although it will help you as you go through this. But the answer's in the Bible. So let's look at this passage in Matthew chapter 19. And now notice, the Lord just dealt with a very difficult subject in the previous verses of Matthew 19. He's dealing with marriage and divorce and remarriage and all that. The problem, relationships are difficult. And there's a lot of heartache out there. And just as he finishes that topic, now he lays into this topic. So he's talking about sexuality, marriage, remarriage, and all that, adultery, that subject. And now he comes to this subject of eunuchs. And we miss something here. But let's look at verse 11 first before we get into verse 12. Because verse 12 is where it's all packed in. But we must address verse 11. In Matthew chapter 19, verse 11, he says, "But he said unto them," this is Jesus, "all men cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it is given." So the Lord is saying, I'm going to now cut into something that really only affects a few people, not everybody. And to those who this is given, this message will be understood by them. They'll know it. The rest of you, you haven't got a clue what I'm talking about. Okay, this doesn't apply to you really. But trust me, there's some people who need to hear this. So now he unpacks it. Verse number 12. "For there are some eunuchs." Well, what's a eunuch? A eunuch is someone who is given to singleness, not sexuality. They're not going to have a sexual partner. They are going to live without sex. Now, some people can't. As verse number 11 now makes it clear. But he said to them, all men cannot receive this saying. I can't receive that saying. Okay. I'm thankful for my wife and for my marriage and all that. I can't imagine not having that. Okay. And so not everyone's going to be able to receive this, but we're going to get into a topic that some people can. So there are some eunuchs, and there's 3 ways a person can become a eunuch. The Lord lays it out. Number 1, which were so born from their mother's womb. In other words, they came into this world because I designed them that way. They were designed to be single. I desired for them to have a life of singleness and not be plagued with having to have these sexual desires upon them and not be able to live a life of singleness. So I have cut that from them so that they can give their life in single service to me. So some were made that way by God. Thus the title, Born That Way After All. Okay? So there's one group of eunuchs that are born that way. Then he gets into a second group of eunuchs. And there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men. So in other words, they were maybe a slave and they were put in charge of or going to be working in the home, in the house. They want to make sure that they didn't take advantage of their wives or their daughters and stuff. And so they were made a eunuch, largely through castration and whatever. So they were made eunuchs by men. So 2 groups. One's made by God, 2 made by men. And number 3, which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. So in other words, I want to serve God in singleness, even though I have the desires, but I am choosing to live a life of singleness and be a eunuch and not give to those desires. And I'm going to serve God, even though those things are active in my life, but I'm going to overcome them. He that is able to receive this, let him receive it, as that passage is finished. And so let's break this down. We live in a day today when a person who comes out and says, I'm just not attracted to girls. And therefore we jump in there and say, well, then I guess then you're homosexual. If you don't have an attraction to girls, if you're not aroused or whatever, therefore you must be this. We have come to the conclusion and led people, not we Christians, but the world has. The world has jumped on that. And they hear from the world, well, because they know in their heart, I'm just not normal like everyone else. Let me tell you how this got started for Johnny Nixon and how his ministry got started. When I met him, by the way, 10 years ago, maybe 12 now, and he wrote his book, Born That Way After All, at that time, over 2,000 people were delivered from homosexuality because they realized I wasn't born homosexual. I was born to be a eunuch. And they learned that they're not destined for a life of homosexuality, which they hated. And so let me tell you how this started. a man in his church had a child who was a godly boy, went to Bible college and raised, and then he comes back and says, listen, Dad, I'm a homosexual. And of course, that created shame and hurt, confusion, all that. And so many people like that, Christians who've got children, boys or girls, who are coming announcing this stuff. And he said, and he went to his pastor, and Brother Johnny said, well, listen, I've been just reading in Matthew 19 this about eunuchs, and it occurred to me that they were made that way by God. Maybe we've missed something here. Maybe they've heard that if they're not attracted to girls, that they must be therefore homosexual, and your boy's been hearing that by other people. Maybe if he understands God did design him that way, and that freed this boy from homosexuality, and he started explaining to Brother Johnny and his dad, and said, listen, I tried to like girls. I tried to be normal like everyone else. I went on dates. I did this, that, and the other, and I tried. But I just knew there's just nothing there. I'm just not aroused. I don't there. And so he then started concluding, and the ways of the world are, if you're not attracted to girls, you must be homosexual. So then he tried to do that with boys, and just the same. To be honest, he said, to be honest, I was having the same struggle that I had there and with girls. And so it freed him from all that guilt and shame and misery that he was living in. Maybe you know someone who needs to know that truth. And if you need more help on that, contact us. We'll try to help you, but try to reach out to Johnny Nixon's ministry. Is simply called Born That Way After All. Get his book, and it may be a help to you. And I hope that what we talk about here on our program is a help to our listeners. And we're blessed by those who support our ministry so that we can continue to share this important stuff. Because these are things that are, this and many other things that we talk about here at Fortress of Faith are not discussed from the pulpit. Many churches, they're not discussed. We got a lot of great Bible preachers and teachers on the radio. I just felt, as God called me into this ministry, we need to encourage people to be salt and light and to speak the truth, to have the courage, even in difficult situations. And I hope that this will be a blessing to you. God bless you. So join us again tomorrow at the corner of truth and courage. Now go out and be salt and light.